Hello everyone, and welcome to the presentation I like to call Flutter from an Android developer's perspective. My name is Perry, and I'm going to share with you my experience and thoughts about Flutter from the beginning of 2019, where I used Flutter for mobile applications in production. Before I begin, let's talk about why should you, as Android developers, care about Flutter in general and about this presentation. So, my first reason for you is superpower. As an Android developer that chooses to develop his next Android app in Flutter, you will gain a kind of a superpower because you will simply start to implement much faster. It's not a cliche. I know it sounds like a cliche, but when you develop in Flutter, you simply implement your features much faster. The second reason is, again, superpower, because as a Flutter developer that knows already native Android development, you have your advantage because sometimes you may need to tackle problems and solve them only by Android development. And many Flutter developers simply don't have your experience you already have in Android native development. So, for my experience, I'm looking at it as a great advantage that you will have from day one when using Flutter. Third reason, you guessed it, is also superpower because as an Android developer that chooses to develop an application by using Flutter, you are automatically get your iOS app. Of course, you can refer that to any other cross-platform framework out there, but I also would like to mention this advantage as well about Flutter. So, first of all, I will present myself. My name is Perry, and I'm a mobile software engineer for the last 9 years. In parallel, I was also a lecturer in Afeka Academic College in TLV. I was teaching the students native iOS development and native Android development in different courses. Plus, in 2019, I was also getting to know Flutter. Actually, the circumstances of the company I was working on led me to know Flutter, and I'm really happy for that. So the company is actually BreezoMeter. BreezoMeter had already mobile apps which developed in native. You can see here the screens of the Android app and the iOS app. The Android app was published in 2014. The iOS was published a year later. But in 2019, they needed some mobile developer that will take these two apps and improve them, maintain them, even if it says that you need to develop your new app from scratch. So in that time, I already knew native development in iOS and Android. Before coming to BreezoMeter, I made projects with combining these both platforms. It was always only native. I never used cross-platform. It felt like it's a good thing to me with coming to BreezoMeter and renew their apps. I accepted the challenge and I wanted to renew their apps, even if it says that I will need to develop twice from scratch the iOS mobile app and the Android mobile app. So let's talk about the technologies. Oh yeah, right. First of all, what is BreezoMeter? BreezoMeter is a very cool company. They help to save lives, basically. They have many products, but their main product is actually an API. They're supplying air quality API for big companies and small companies, also mobile applications. And to present their API, they also made a mobile app, the same apps I showed you previous slide. So here you can see a demonstration of the air quality heat map that shows in a very visual and convenient way the air quality and its changes. They also provide a history API and forecast API of the air quality, which is pretty awesome. And I'm happy to say that not too long ago, a website called TechRadar published the Android app that I made for BreezoMeter, and they said it's one of the best new free Android app. And that's very cool to know that as well. So yeah, if jump to the end, so I renew BreezoMeter apps simply to Flutter, and that was the outcome, as you can see here. Let's be clear, we're not going to compare between Flutter and React Native. I know that many people tend to do so, but if you still want to see these comparisons, there are many resources on the web. You can read articles, you can hear podcasts, and see also conversation across the web. So in this presentation, I'm not going to concentrate on that. I simply chose Flutter. That was, of course, after doing my research in BreezoMeter. You can see here a slide that I took from a previous meetup I made before with a friend. There we presented these, let's call it power levels of each cross-platform framework. And for me, I chose Flutter because I felt that the coding debugging is really important to move on. Plus, of course, not to forget the performance of Flutter apps. And I can say right now that it was a great decision. I am not regretting it. For me, it was coding plus debugging. I'm developing simply faster. I was a sole developer, and to move faster, I had to consider that at least instead of moving 2 times slower than in a cross platform. So that's why I gave the opportunity for using a cross platform framework. Until that, I didn't know I'm gonna use cross platform because I love native mobile development, but I'm very happy to say that I got to know Flutter as well, as I'm using it also today. Before showing you my thoughts about Flutter and what did I need to take in account, I want to ask you, have you heard about Jetpack Compose? I'm sure you did. And as an Android developers, have you heard about SwiftUI? I also think most of you did hear about it. So Jetpack Compose and SwiftUI, if I'll say it in general and also in few sentences, they both use declarative programming, and they both simply have some kind of a canvas they paint on. So these two, it's really interesting to see that, because when Google presented it, it felt like it's kind of a Flutter, but it's in Android. Also, when Apple presented the Swift UI, I said, okay, that's really similar to Flutter. So that's another motivation, I think, to get to know Flutter, because while knowing Flutter, you have these kind of also behaviors in both platforms, which is very cool. When I had to choose the framework, of course, I considered these four plus native development. And let's jump to the end of my decision. I simply chose Flutter. Of course, after investigating, debugging, and see the performance of each cross-platform. But when I was learning Flutter as a native mobile developer, not necessarily on as an Android, but also as a iOS native developer, I had many concerns, but here I'm gonna list only a few because I don't want to take too much of your time. So I will talk about some of my concerns in that time. First of all, it was weird to me that Flutter doesn't have a UI editor. You simply code your UI. It was a bit strange for me. Until then, I never developed in declarative programming. It was kind of new to me. I was only coding in imperative programming. So, of course, I had to learn that. It was actually kind of cool to see that you simply declare the whole UI tree. So that's the idea. But of course, I'm going to talk about it in the coming slides. Also, memory management. I was thinking about that because iOS has their own memory management, and of course, we know that in Android we have the garbage collector for memory management. So I was wondering how Flutter deals with memory management, because it's kind of a new framework. Actually, I thought it's a new framework, but I later understood that Flutter exists for many years before, and only in the end of 2018 they published their production ready version. So as a new framework, how do they deal with the memory management? That was interesting for me to know. Plus, when I wrote ListView, I I thought about recycler view, and it didn't exactly felt like I'm implementing a recycler view. It was very simple, and I was wondering if it's efficient, my implementation of the list view in Flutter. Flavors, it was also a very important concern that I had to take in mind. And animations, yeah, as an imperative programmer, I just knew that I need to like have the reference to the object I want to animate and simply call the animate functions. And then I can do some animations. There's, of course, many ways in native development. But in declarative programming, it was kind of also weird to me in that time. And of course, maps. BreezoMeter must have a map in their app because one of their main product is a heat map. So they must have a map to show their heat map on it. So in Flutter, it felt how I'm gonna do it. How exactly can I show a map embedded in a Flutter app? Because the map is actually a native component. So you kind of need to embed a native component inside a Flutter component. I'm gonna talk about it as well. If I'm talking about Flutter to people that want to get to know Flutter, so I will be happy to share my pain points, pitfalls, and gotchas in the end of this presentation. When learning Dart as a person who knows Kotlin, it was actually kind of easy because you can say about Dart many things. You can say that it reminds the developer his own language. Of course, they have their own differences, but it was kind of easy to learn Dart as a programmer, or even if you're new to programming, so you can dive in already to Dart. So let's take this as an example. There's the alert method I made. It's a static method, and as you can see here, you can understand exactly what's happening here. Um, I I guess you already familiar with the name parameters. That's how it's called in Flutter. And you also know already the Elvis operator, which says if it's null, then choose the other option. Of course, as you can see here, you have also nullables, and also extensions was a kind of very important for me as a developer to have. And in the beginning of 2019, Flutter, actually Dart, didn't have extensions, but I already knew that Dart keeps developing. Flutter actually improves Dart. The team of Flutter, they are communicating with the team of Dart, so Dart adds features along the way. So also extensions is something that was added during 2019. The thing here in this example that I'm also showing you another way to use like a getter. It's a function that is presented like a variable, but it's not a variable. Every time you call this variable, you're invoking this method behind the scenes. The thing here is that sometimes you can call an extension that belongs to a null object. So here I always using this first condition, checking if the object is actually not null. That's interesting why it's happening. I have my thoughts about it, but I won't jump into conclusions right now. As you can see here, I'm checking first if it's empty, and if it's empty, return null. Because if you will simply call last when the collection is empty, then you will get an error. Errors in Flutter, by the way, are like exceptions, but they're not crashing the app. It is presented in a very friendly way, actually. Another example of an extension is this example. You can use, as mentioned, computer properties, and also you have inferred types like Kotlin has. When I'm using var numbers count, so the compiler understands that the numbers count variable is from the type of regular expression. So it's unlike JavaScript that you can put into this var later integer. It is a strong typed language. My next example of an extension, we can use also named arguments and default arguments. When using this example, I can put the label as I saw before. From the outside, you know exactly in which parameter the value belongs to. Another very cool feature of Dart is the async await. As we already knew in JavaScript, there's the async await, and lately Android added also coroutines. So the async await is a very convenient way to make asynchronous operations. And you can also choose not to use the async await if you want to. You can use simply then. It's very simple to implement, by the way. And also you can use a try catch with this ability. If you wrap the await line in a try catch, you can get the error of the asynchronous operation, which is very cool. If you still want to use callbacks, you can use then, as I mentioned before. But here also, instead of try catch, you can use the catch error callback. So you get to choose the style of the implementation you want. By the time that I was learning Flutter, I felt that Google made a great work with simplifying things. Although this specific snapshot was taken from a presentation they talked about Android, I also felt this way about Flutter. So I'll begin with my first concern I want to present to you, which is the fact that Flutter don't have a UI editor. So before I will tell you about the UI editor, I would like to ask you an interview question I heard many times before. So the question goes like this. How would you prefer to build UI of the app, of course, using the code or XML files, which is the layout XML? So when you think about it, there's no exactly one answer for that. It depends. There is no correct answer. There is no like by the book answer. It's more like if you feel that you will work faster and you're making something dynamic, so you would prefer sometimes using code, but sometimes faster means using the XML. So I guess the interviewer wants to hear whether you are flexible and whether you can explain yourself. So regarding this question, I think this should be the answer. That was always my answer. The answer is it depends. But if I'm talking about Flutter regarding this question, so there is no like option. It will be always code. But actually, I kind of like it. It was weird to me at first, but when you think about it, it's very good because having the UI implemented only via code gives you the single source of truth of the UI. This way, developers in the team won't get confused whether it was defined on the XML or whether it was defined on the code. So if the developer sometimes need to change something that is already implemented, so he knows exactly where to go, always to the code. So using Flutter, it will be always the same place. Plus, when you code it, you literally can see the UI tree, which is also cool because developing in iOS and in Android eventually will give you the UI tree. So developing with Flutter, you are really viewing the tree that you are presenting. something that I also wanted to mention here, Flutter uses JIT compilation when you are developing the app. JIT compilation stands for just-in-time compilation, meaning that while you are developing, it is compiling. In release, you don't need JIT compilation. So in release mode, it will be AOT compilation, ahead of time compilation. So when in release, it will run faster. The JIT compilation, of course, makes the app slower, but it's okay because you are just developing it. So why am I talking about the JIT compilation anyway? The JIT compilation allows us to use hot reloading, which is a super cool feature by Flutter. You guys know already Instant Run from Android, but this is so much better. You simply change your code, and it takes only the delta, only the change of the code, and puts it in the running of a application. So the developing actually really becomes faster. And yeah, hot reload actually works. When I'm thinking about the fact that of the preview, so I don't really need a preview. You can inspect the UI. This one is an example from BreezoMeter app that I wanted to do something a bit complex, not too much, with rotating stuff, okay, because I wanted to present the files around the user. So I could just play with it, and it responds like a preview. I'm just changing the code, and I can see the preview. It's not exactly a preview, it's like a live preview, because the preview actually has the data that I just got from the server. So I would say that it's even better than having a preview. So when using hot reloading, the UI can change just like that. What just happened? Well, I guess someone just changed the property of dark theme and forced the dark mode. Yeah, you can change logic and properties so you can see how the UI changes according to the logic. Speaking of dark stuff, let's talk about iOS. Here we can see the UI inspector of Flutter, and here you can see the UI inspector of iOS, the native side. Why am I showing this to you? Just to show you how Flutter handles its own UI hierarchy. As you can see here, these are the UI views of the native iOS app. Just like in Android, they also have their own UI inspector, and you can see the hierarchy of the native views. But here you can see that Flutter can give you also a UI inspector by its own, and you can debug your own UI using Flutter. Plus, here you can also guess that Flutter don't have native views at all. The whole UI hierarchy of Flutter is inside one single native view. Continuing with the dark stuff, let's talk about errors. So UI errors are pretty convenient because Flutter will simply present the errors to you, and it won't crash the app. Plus, you can fix it and continue to work. Thanks to hot reload as well. You can make mistakes, but you can fix them as the app runs. As you can see here, I made a mistake by using integer in the generics of one of these classes. The generics should accept some type of a number, and I used integer, although I needed to use double. I had to use floating point, which integers don't have. So by doing this mistake, you can see the error, just like that. And after I fixed it and hit save, you can see the fix as the app runs. If you have other errors, you can also catch them as the app runs. You have various tools to handle those. The most familiar one is Crashlytics, of course. They also catch Flutter errors. Plus, you have also Crash Ops, which is what I am working on in my current job. And these tools will help you to find errors as your app's running in production. Moving on to memory management. When I wrote the code in Flutter as a native developer, it looked like I'm doing a lot of allocation and deallocation. It felt like the code that I'm writing is making a lot of objects, and right afterwards it kills them. And as a native developer, it felt like a really expensive work. You can see already the mass allocation just like in this code. You don't need anymore to use new, by the way. The Flutter team asked the Dart team to remove the keyword new because there are so many allocations in Flutter, so it becomes redundant to use this keyword over and over again. So here you can see there are many constructors actually. So that's exactly the thing that led me to think about the allocations. You can see here a constructor of scaffold, a constructor of app bar, a constructor of center, and calling some kind of a factory method called builder from the ListView, which also generates another object. So what happens here is whenever the garbage collector works, it won't affect the performance of your app, which is really cool. It uses generations. If you want to read more, you can enter this link in this presentation. We will go back to this example in a few slides, so don't worry, I will explain every line in this piece of code. Whenever I used ListView, it felt a bit weird to me because I was educated to use requestLayout, which has the view holder because we want to save data, right? We want to save allocations. We would like to recycle the items, of course. But in Flutter, it didn't feel this way. It felt a bit different. I didn't get a feeling that it is recycling stuff, but as a developer, I didn't see it. As a user, I could see that the state is preserved in the items, which also raised some questions about how does it work. So I'm presenting the previous piece of code that we saw before. So let's see what happens here. Okay, so the build method should return some kind of a widget instance. It's not a view. We must understand that unlike a native Android development, it's not that you have the view object and the user sees the view. Actually, the widget is only a set of instructions, and that's it. So Flutter will know exactly how to paint on the canvas. So whenever I call build method, I should return some kind of a widget, and scaffold is some kind of a widget. Scaffold is like a skeleton of a material application screen. Okay, so like any material design screen, you have the app bar. So here you can define the app bar. It's not necessarily should be an app bar instance. You can pass here other widgets. The app bar property should accept a widget. This body also should get a widget. And here I used a center widget, which simply centers its child inside of it. So the list view will be in the center. Here I'm calling a builder, which is like a factory method. And this builder have some other properties like padding stuff, plus item count, controller if you wish to control the scrolling or observe the scrolling. And you have here the item builder, which is some kind of the view holder, you can call it, but it's not exactly view holder, as you can see. You just need to return the widget, which represents the item of that index. Yep, that's exactly it. You don't have an adapter and you don't use a view holder. I looked into it and I got to a conclusion that Flutter simply has its own recycling system. Plus, you have also articles in the web, which simply shows that Flutter recycles its own objects. As I said before, these widgets are only a set of instructions. So the set of instructions are moving on to the render objects, and these render objects are being preserved, and they are actually recycled. In this example, I'm using an animated GIF, and this is the elephant of BreezoMeter. By the way, this elephant called Bucky, and you can see Bucky here is moving, and whenever the user stops seeing this movement of Bucky, you can see that is being preserved, right? Whenever a frame is stopped in some place, you can see that he continues the exact movement on another place, which led me to the conclusion that it is recycled. Let's just exit the dark theme and move on to the normal theme. Okay, cool. So flavors. As an Android developer who already familiar with the flavors, it was really important for me to have different environments of a BreezoMeter app. So if you are already familiar with flavors in Android, I can assure you that it will be super easy to use the flavors in your Flutter app. You can follow this link and you will see that it's really easy to use. Before talking about animations, I would like to make a small transition of myself from one state to another. Cool. So, animations. What is exactly an animation? Animation is a presentation of transition from state A to state B, right? As Android developers, we know that to make an animation, you need to capture the view that you want to animate and do the animations on it. So in Flutter, it's a bit different. Instead of taking the view and animate, you need to declare the animation. And that exactly I'm gonna show you here. There are many types of animations. I will show you one example of an out-of-the-box animation that is given as a gift from Flutter. And I'm gonna show you another example that is being made actually thanks to a third-party library. So let's start with the out-of-the-box animations. Here, I'm gonna present to you the animated align. You have several other animations, by the way, but I'm gonna concentrate on this one. The designer of BreezoMeter gave me this design of this button of the temperature, so the user can toggle between these two presentations. So I used animated align just to show exactly the selected one. So the state actually here is the selected title index property. And by changing this one, the animation knows exactly where to go. Should this circle be aligned to the right or to the left? Let's talk about what happens exactly in this piece of code. There's the alignment, which this is the actual property that will make the animation because it's an animated align. The duration, of course, you're already familiar with, and the child. Let's remember that a widget is a set of instructions. So you're giving also the instructions to what exactly you want to align. And this gives us the circle shape. And if I will present to you how do I change the state of this variable, let's zoom out from this piece of code. And this is exactly how it's done. You're calling setState, and setState tells Flutter repaint the widget, but with another state. I'm changing the state, and that will produce the animation. While calling a setState, I'm changing a state of a widget. I didn't mention it until now, but in Flutter we have two types of a widget. We have the stateful widget, which has a state, and the widget can change by calling setState. And we have also a stateless widget, which is more efficient actually, because Flutter knows that it's never going to be changed. So to make an animation, I must use a stateful widget, like this example. Plus, when I'm calling a setState, I'm also calling another static method that makes a haptic feedback. In case the app will run on an iPhone, the user will feel the haptic feedback on his iPhone. But in case it's not an iPhone or an older iPhone, or maybe an Android that doesn't have the haptic feedbacks hardware, it will simply feel a small vibrate. And that's what happens after calling this method. So we just saw how we're making an out-of-the-box animation. Now let's talk about making custom animation. For that, I used a great library which called Animator. Animator helped me a lot by simplifying the animations. Before I used Animator, it was pretty hard and it wasn't too intuitive, but the Animator really helped me with making various animations, also today. Here you can see the pumping heart. I just used a favorite icon and scaled it so it will look like it's pumping. And let's see what exactly I did here. The animator asks to have a twin object. The twin, actually, you can look at it as a pair in Android, as you have a pair with first and second. So in twin, you have the begin and the end. As you can guess, the twin tells the animator from which state to what state are we animating. And the animator will give us values according to the curve. The curve is the interpolation, as you already know, in Android. Here I made the animation endless, which will pump endlessly. For more explanations about why did I choose to put 0 here, you can follow this link. I'm gonna share this presentation as well. The duration, of course, you're already familiar with. The builder has a parameter that's called animation, and inside this animation we have the animated value, as you also already know in native Android development. And what I'm doing here is I'm returning a scaled widget. By the way, it's very important here not to make too much complex calculations, because this builder is gonna call for each frame. So to save performance of your app, try to put here only stateless widgets, which will get painted quicker than other widgets. So here I'm just putting the favorite icon, and that's it. Moving on to maps. Especially for maps, I will move to the dark theme. So we've reached to the final concern I would like to share with you. Of course, as I said, there are so many concerns I had in the time, and we all do as mobile developers, but this is the last one I share with you. We cannot forget that BreezoMeter app must have a map embedded inside the app. So remember when I told you that the native views have their own hierarchy? So how can we exactly embed a native view inside Flutter? Because Flutter handles its own UI hierarchy. Today I can tell you that Flutter handles much better with native views. It's called platform views, and they can today also embed a native map in the Flutter app. So back in 2019, I didn't have this solution, or let's say that the solution was not so baked. So I had to find a creative solution of my own. So I had to communicate somehow with the native side. Thankfully, Flutter has a bridge between the Android and the Flutter framework. Also, in general, Flutter has the bridge that connects between the Flutter and its host platform. So in that case, I had the bridge between the Android native and the Flutter framework, as I also had in iOS. So having that said, that's how the communication looks like. You have the Flutter app that is being hosted in iOS app or Android. Of course, today Flutter can run on web or on Windows or even on a Mac OS, which that I also do today. So for this example, the Flutter simply talks with its Android host. So if we have this kind of bridge, I call it a bridge, but Flutter calls it method channel. So using this method channel, I can invoke many methods that are being handled on the native side. And of course, I need to implement them also in the iOS side. So let's concentrate on open maps. Simply, the Flutter app asks from the Android app to open the maps. And this is what I had to compromise. When Flutter asks from the native to open the maps, in Android, the app will open another activity, which is the map activity. You can see it here. And that's how I'm going back in iOS, but in Android also you just need to click it and you have the transition that goes back to the Flutter app. By the way, the native screen here can communicate with Flutter, so you can even look at it as a client server, that the Flutter as a client talks with the server, which the server in that case would be the native side. Plus it's back and forth. So sometimes the native could be the client of Flutter, because the native also can ask from Flutter, do some stuff and query for data. So we're pretty happy for this compromise. Until today, they are still using it. That's why I'm calling it a compromise, because it's not that bad. So yeah, today I can say that Flutter plus BreezoMeter was a love story. I mean, they helped me a lot. By helping me, they helped all the BreezoMeter team and everyone that works around it as well. I can totally say that Flutter is freedom out of the box, because Flutter gives you the whole freedom inside of it. So it manages everything that is related to your Flutter app, plus the UI, of course. Looking forward, of course, at least I can say that almost every mobile project, maybe even web or macOS, that I want to make in the future, I will totally consider using Flutter. Of course, not all the time Flutter is the best option, but in most cases, it can definitely be the best choice. Because when I used Flutter, I felt that I'm simply coding faster and getting a beautiful UI. So we're almost finished. Kudos to everyone that got this far. We have reached to the pitfalls. So I'm gonna talk about 5 pain points I had in that time. The first one can happen to every Android app, not related only to Flutter. When you adding Firebase to your project and you forgot to put the Google configuration JSON file, expect the app to crash without explanations. When you are upgrading a Flutter version, do it carefully. By being careful, I mean that simply commit and push your code, backup it somehow, or even use a different branch, because that also can happen even to Android developers and almost every developer. Especially don't do it before launching a new version. This one is related only to Flutter. Do you remember when I talked about JIT compilation and AOT compilation? I said that in JIT compilation, the app will run slower, but I didn't mean that it will be too slow for the human eye. Basically, Flutter apps on debug mode look pretty fine, but still, when you use stuff like media query, which helps you to understand what is the size of the screen and more parameters on the host screen, the media query can return zero size. I mean that the width and the height are empty. This, for example, happened to me when I tested my first release version. So what you can do is using this solution that I'm putting here, simply I can say that before continuing with the app, I'm checking that the media query returns non-empty values. Another one is package clashes, which can happen to anyone, also not specifically in Flutter. Again, back up your code and do it carefully, update your libraries carefully. Okay, that one is also related to Android plus Flutter. Sometimes you may get errors when aiming to an SDK version that is lower than 21. It happened to me, it happens to other people as I saw on the web. My best suggestion is aim to an SDK version that is higher or equals to 21, simply because it can save you a lot of headache. So I think we have reached to the end of this presentation. In case you have questions, feel free to comment on this YouTube video. And here you can find some resources that helped me back in 2019. There are some really interesting podcasts. These first two are only in Hebrew, but they are very interesting and they helped me a lot. Plus, these guys are also making great podcasts anyway. All the other resources here are in English. And my friends and I are managing one of these two great Facebook groups. This one is Flutter.al, where my friends and I are managing. And there's also another Facebook group which called FID, Flutter Israel Developers. These both Facebook groups have a lot of great and experienced Flutter developers, plus mobile developers, so feel free to visit them and ask them whatever you like on Flutter. This Flutter dev on Telegram is also a great one. I get tons of info about Flutter. They are simply streaming in whatever you got from the internet. Also, these Medium posts, some of my friends, some are by me, some are simply great. And that's it. Yeah. So I would like to thank you everyone who have reached to this final slide. I hope you enjoyed. I know I did. And if I help even one single developer around the world, I'm grateful for that. So happy coding, everyone. Bye.